This week we are back with Laufer and Rozovski-Roitblat, but this time with a follow-up to their 2011 study. Today we'll be discussing this paper. Retention of new words, quantity of encounters, quality of task, and degree of knowledge. This paper, like the last, was shared on academia.edu by one of the authors, Batya Laufer. Once again, it's another study on the interplay between task type, what you're doing, quantity of encounters, how often you see a word, and vocabulary acquisition. Like their previous study, this one covers focus on form versus focus on forms, but this time the study is different, as it adds a pure easy reading condition, and what happens when you mix in different numbers of word encounters with focus on form, focus on forms, or easy reading. This is a complicated but very interesting study. And like the last, the focus here is on vocabulary acquisition. This is not a test of every aspect of language learning, just one. But now, let's talk about the participants. The study was done with 185 high school graduates who were taking an EFL course in reading comprehension for academic purposes. They had 7 to 8 years of English, but weren't ready for regular university courses. They were expected to be able to read a text that consisted mostly of the most common 2,000 English words. They were native speakers of Hebrew, Arabic, and Russian. They did pre-tests to see what these students already knew and found 30 target words they could use for the study. The study was 11 weeks long. Each reading was approximately 470 tokens long, meaning it was 470 total words, not unique words. Given their level, the text fit within the parameters of extensive reading, and they should have known most of the words in their reading already. And they had 4 unexpected tests 2 weeks after all of the reading to test acquisition. So that is the who, the how long and the nature of the texts they were reading. But how did they approach the material? As mentioned before, there are 3 task types. Here they are with their shortened labels in the study. That's on the left, just in case you want to read it. We have a pure reading task, a reading plus dictionary use task, and a single reading plus exercises task. Let's go through these. First, there is a reading-only condition. They saw the test words in text with no extra information about them outside the text themselves. They were not allowed to use a dictionary. The chosen texts were then modified for them to provide clues to the words' meanings. They didn't have access to a dictionary, so this was necessary. Also, the reading-only task got extra text with more occurrences for those same words. As the authors say, and I quote, "Literature provides sufficient evidence which shows that people acquire some vocabulary knowledge from reading only after 6 occurrences, particularly in the long term." Unquote. So they encountered the words 3 times more than the other 2 task types. As an exercise, they wrote their summaries in their L1 about the text. To complete these, they would have to understand the target words, but not necessarily use them. This task was reading plus using a dictionary. This is the focus on form condition, as all activities were about negotiating the meaning of words in the context of the reading. Same starter text as the reading condition. This one didn't have the extra text or changed phrasing that would allow them to understand without a dictionary, so they were expected to use one. They encountered each word multiple times in the text, depending on the number of encounters condition, which we'll discuss soon. As an exercise, they had to answer 10 multiple-choice or true-false questions that did not use the word, though they would have needed to understand the word to answer the questions. Now the final condition, 1 plus FS, the reading plus exercises. The students would see the word only once in the text. All other occurrences were in the exercises, which included fill in the blank with a provided word bank, matching target words to definitions or synonyms, supplying the L2 translation for the L1 word in isolation, or supplying the L2 translation for L1 equivalents in a sentence. This is your focus on forms condition, because the other occurrences of the words were out of the context of the reading. So those were the tasks. But how many word occurrences did they actually see of the 30 target words? This is where the number of occurrences conditions came in so they could test interaction between task type and word exposure. So how many times did they see the words? Let's use the studies table for this. 10 of the 30 target words were in the lowest occurrence condition, 10 in the middle, and 10 in the highest. In the reading condition, they saw the terms only in readings, and saw them 3 times as much as the other 2 conditions. So they saw the same 10 words 6 or 9 times, 12 or 15 times, 18 or 21 times in their text. In the F condition, that's reading with a dictionary, they would see 10 terms 2 or 3 times, 10 of the terms 4 or 5 times, and 10 terms 6 or 7 times. In the 1 plus FS condition, they saw the term only once in the reading, that's what the 1 is for, and the rest were in the exercises. So, for example, if they were to see a word 7 times, they would see it only once in the reading and 6 more times in the exercises. But, like the previous, 10 words in each occurrence condition. So that's how they divvied up task and word occurrence. But how did they test knowledge? This is another very interesting aspect of this study. In their post-testing, they measured results in terms of 4 degrees of word knowledge. In my examples, we'll say we have English speakers being tested on learning Greek. Active recall is being able to supply the L2 target word for its L1 translation. They supplied the first letter of the target word, presumably, because synonyms can make things difficult in this kind of test. For example, this would be like if a test had I hear. So this is a test of being able to produce in the language they are studying, in this case Greek, so akuo. Passive recall is being able to supply an L1 translation of an L2 word. For example, if they were to see akuo, they would have to supply something like I hear. Active recognition is when you can recognize a target word's meaning among options. So you might be given I hear and have to pick which of agathos, balo, grapho, or akuo is the correct choice. And finally, passive recognition would be the ability to recognize an L1 equivalent of an L2 word. So you might be given akuo and had to pick the correct option out of pants, I hear, walk, or read. Personally, I found this terminology confusing. The first one is what you would need when speaking or writing, and the next when listening or reading. These top 2 are the most difficult to do in testing and in real life, as we'll see. And though the top 2 activities are what we generally think of when learning another language, the other 2 still help measure learning, so they're useful for this kind of study. Okay, so 3 different types of tasks: reading a lot, reading less but with the dictionary, and reading even less with accompanying exercises, with all 3 tested against different occurrence counts, with 4 ways of testing. Not a simple study, but what were the results? For these, we'll go to the paper. We'll start here with the active recall results. The 3 sets of bars represent number of occurrence conditions. On the left, the lowest occurrence count, and on the right, the highest. The darkest bar represents 1 plus FS, or those who read a word once but saw the other occurrences in exercises. The gray bar represents group F, or the group that saw more occurrences in reading and got to use a dictionary. The white bar represents those who just had readings. Each activity, or number of encounters combo, had 10 words, and a correct answer got you 1 point, so the maximum score is 10. Now that we understand the graph, we can see that no condition fares well when occurrence count is low, but the condition that had the words in separate exercises had the best score in all conditions. In the latter condition group, though, seeing a word once in text and then being able to produce 30% of the words after, in some cases 11 weeks of reading and 2 weeks of waiting for a post-test, is not bad. Passive recall, the activity that would more closely correspond to reading or listening, was better with a greater number of occurrences, as you would expect. Also, the focus on forms condition, with less reading and more exercises, wins in vocabulary retention. Notice also the focus on form condition, the one where you read and use the dictionary, improved very dramatically. Active recognition, the next learning measurement, had higher scores, but this is an easier task, so you would expect that. Also, passive recognition, the last and easiest, had the highest scores. So what did I find interesting about this study? Once again, generally, less encounters are needed with focus on forms to produce the same results as reading alone when it comes to vocabulary acquisition. Read, but exercise any vocabulary that you want to remember. But when it comes to this versus extensive reading, tiu quem fatra. Why not both? Beyond the scope of this study, the obvious application, though, is to do extensive reading because of the benefits there and exercise your vocabulary. That there is clear value in increased repetition will likely surprise no one, but we need studies like this to make sure we're not making bad assumptions. So this is great. Repetition always helps, but it helps more in some activities than others. What is the value of looking up a word in a dictionary? Obviously, you need to understand a word to learn it, but I have heard it said that students find benefit in looking up a word in a dictionary rather than having the meaning of a word given to them. Is that effort of looking it up in a dictionary itself valuable? When it comes to active recall, the ability to produce the word, the authors themselves point out the weakness of this method. Maybe just the act of looking up something in a dictionary doesn't provide that much benefit. In the previous study by the authors, they only tested passive recall. That's going from L2 to L1, so essentially being able to read or listen and understand. And passive recognition, being able to pick an L1 word out of a lineup to show that you understand a word in the second language. Adding in active recall, the ability to produce in the second language, as a very important element to proving the value of the experiment. I thought it was a complicated but interesting paper. Check it out if you want more details. In the meantime, get back to reading and practicing your languages.